Now that you understand what MRP is and how it relates to labor demand, we're going to consider a few things that would actually change the resource demand or the MRP curve. Number one is a change in product demand, because if the change in the product demand, if let's say there's an increase in demand for yo-yos, that would cause the price of yo-yos to go up, which would change the total revenue at each level of production and would increase the MRP. So if there's more demand for yo-yos, there would actually be more demand for yo-yo workers. The second factor that could change resource demand would be a change in the productivity of the resource. So back to the first slide when we talked about Angie, if she could produce more t-shirts, then her MRP would be higher. And if that were true for all workers, then there would actually be demand for more workers. What can make workers more productive? A number of things. First of all, having more other resources to work with, having better capital, so a newer computer, that's probably the main one, but a better phone to use, that sort of thing. And then also more education for the worker, which is why a lot of companies do a lot of training for their workers. This is also why workers in industrialized nations tend to be a lot more productive than workers in other countries, and that is why we get paid more, because the companies that we work for supply us with a lot of education and capital. Number three is kind of a complicated one, and that's because it is a change in the price of another resource. And there can actually be a lot of different impacts depending on the relationship between the resources. So right now we're just going to consider land and capital. We can look at, labor and capital. We can look at labor and capital as being substitutes for each other. So for example, if I'm working on an assembly line in an auto manufacturing plant and my employer buys a robot to replace me, that would be a case of substitution where they are choosing labor or capital, labor versus capital. The other situation is where you have complementary use of resources. So I'm, again, working at the auto manufacturing plant, but now my employer is buying capital, some type of machinery that requires me to run it. So if the resources must be used together, this is kind of an easy scenario. Then if one becomes cheaper, there will be more demand for the other. So if I'm working at an auto manufacturing plant and there's a new piece of equipment that I would use and that equipment becomes cheaper, then the firm will buy more of that equipment and they will hire more people like me. However, if labor and capital are substitute resources, then we can have a couple different things happen. One is, and this is the primary substitution effect, that cheaper capital prices could actually reduce the demand for labor. So if robots get cheaper, okay, then the company might just buy more robots and they might hire less employees. So employees would lose their jobs. Another possibility, though, which we call the output effect, is that cheaper capital makes it so much more profitable to run the company that the company begins to expand output and ends up hiring more labor anyway. So those are a few of the ways that another resource could actually change the MRP for a worker. All right, two more things. One is resource optimization. In the long run, firms can vary all of their resources, including capital. A firm will want to produce its output with the least cost combination of resources, which will happen when the last dollar spent on each resource yields the same marginal product. If the firm is adding both labor and capital, it should keep adding both until the marginal revenue product of labor divided by the price of labor equals the marginal revenue product of capital divided by the price. This should look familiar because it's the same formula as consumer utility. And if you remember, we had the utility, the marginal utility of fudge divided by the price of fudge, right? And we were comparing that to the marginal utility of coffee divided by the price of coffee. Okay, this was back in week 5, a long time ago. And when we were deciding which one to buy more of, fudge or coffee, we wanted to look at which of these is greater. So if the marginal utility of fudge is 10 and the price of fudge is 5, but the marginal utility of coffee is 6 and the price is only 2, right? Then this ratio gives us 3, this one gives us 2, we want to buy more coffee because we get more marginal utility per dollar spent. We get more bang for a buck. Okay, firms are going to do the exact same thing here. If the marginal revenue product of labor right now is $100 and it costs us $20 to hire a worker, okay, that gives us a marginal revenue product per dollar spent of $5 for labor. Let's say for capital, that the marginal revenue product of capital right now is 200, but the capital costs 100. Marginal revenue product per dollar spent for capital then is only 2. So what should the firm do? It should hire the worker. Okay, we'll hire the worker. But then we'll face this situation again because the marginal revenue product of capital is still higher than the price of capital, so we're probably still thinking about buying it. And we want to consider, well, what about the next worker? Well, the next worker's MRP is not going to be as high, right? Because we know there's diminishing marginal productivity. So let's say the next worker's MRP is 60. Okay, now that ratio is 3. We're still going to hire a worker. But as the worker's MRP gets lower and lower, we're going to get to the point where the firm's going to start buying capital instead. There is only one output level that will actually maximize profit, and that is, of course, where MR equals MC. In terms of resource prices, this is where the MRP of each resource being used is equal to the price of that resource. So the last worker hired brought in exactly as much revenue as their wage cost, and the last piece of machinery purchased brought in exactly as much revenue, okay, as the machinery cost. That is profit maximization. When each resource, is employed to the point where MRP equals the resource price. All right, one last comment, and that is this. There is a marginal productivity theory of income distribution, which states that income gets distributed according to its contribution to society's output. This week, as you read about the MRP of LeBron James, you should think about this, whether or not people actually get paid according to what they contribute to society's output, or if there's something else that actually impacts wages more.